Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Gift of Time, How Delegation Can Give You Space to Succeed, by Gail Thomas, narrated by Megan Tusing. Introduction. A whole book on the subject of delegation? Who'd have thought? Personally, I love short paragraphs and chapters. I'm a total cut-to-it person, no fluff required. If you're like that too, here's your reason to stick with this book, even though it's longer than an article. There's loads in it for you to make other things shorter and your life better. If you need a bit more, here's the next part. Delegation is a multimedia, multi-directional necessity of life. How thoroughly modern of me. There are many benefits to getting delegation right in life, at home as well as at work. The potential of successful delegation to the UK economy at just under £300 billion per annum. You should take your share of that. I know that clients I've dealt with are usually disappointed that there is no quick fix. Great delegation takes time. For many reasons, time is the biggest barrier to successful delegation. But the benefits are massive. I'm a real live case study, and I talk about it readily at the drop of a hat. A grandiose and somewhat unachievable soundbite from Vince Cable at Made Festival for Startup Businesses in 2012 was the inspiration for this book. He said, and I paraphrase, "If we had 900,000 new businesses in the UK tomorrow, we would not have an economic problem. Unemployment would be reduced to an acceptable level, the economic deficit would be eradicated, and our future pensions problem would be resolved." As a serial starter of businesses, I found what he said massively appealing, but as one who knows how tricky it is to get going in the first place, let alone keep a young business afloat, I knew in truth it was a big, if not impossible, ask. But the maths intrigued me and wouldn't let me go. I knew that the UK at that point had some 4.5 million businesses, and thus 900,000 as a proportion of that was 20%. So, give or take, if the businesses that we already had grew by 20%, one could presume that the net effect on the economy would be the same. So how does a business go about growing by 20%? All manner of ways, I suspect. Brand extension, product development, asset leverage, marketing sales, economies of scale, process re-engineering, social media, and business development. It matters not, to be honest. Growth takes time and money, but mainly time. Especially if you've just come out of a recession and the banks aren't lending. So if growth, enough to eradicate our economic woes, reference Vince Cable, takes time from those with the skills to create it, then, I figured, the only way to give these people the time they need is to reduce their workload. The only way to make this happen is by delegating. And if that is true, it de facto means there is value in delegation. So I asked the question, if you could reduce your workload by 10%, what would you do with the time? Over 90% of respondents from SMEs said they would grow the business. And so I asked them how much by. Somewhat ironically, given the Vince Cable starting point, the average response was always just over 20%. Then if you take the current government statistics on SMEs alone and apply the figures to owner-led businesses, the resulting expected growth, on delegating 10% of workload alone, is almost £300 billion per annum. So if you were wondering how this book got its title, there you are. For those who like the greater explanation, here's your bit. Mastering the art of delegation is so much more than that. More than just more money. There is much written on delegation in many media and forms, and I'm sure I've only touched the very outside in my own reading. What I've seen, though, doesn't differ from the bits of delegation theory that I read when I studied for my MBA. It's absolutely right in its content, but it's less compelling if it isn't clear why you might partake. Let me expand here. Because this is the nub of the justification of one whole book dedicated to the single subject of delegation. In a corporate sense, I often find it simply a management skill that is expected. sits theoretically in the lower echelons of the managerial skill set, and yet is rarely taught or trained in. Less, or even never, is it valued as a benefit to the organization in financial or managerial terms. In my experience, it is usually positioned as a skill which benefits team motivation. Trite acronyms accompany an expectation that rank will facilitate necessary delegation. I am more senior, therefore I will pass my workload to you, and you will enjoy and feel motivated by the additional responsibility because it says you are trusted and worthy. I'm simplifying and exaggerating to make a point here, but the MBA I studied didn't give much more than this, to be honest. It took some time for me to realize I had been in the business of delegation for well over a decade. Sharing my secretary with others to save costs led to a small business that was established in 2001, not just surviving, but still going strong well into its second decade. Every visit to that office reinforces the relief that business owners and department managers must or would feel when they hear those words, "Leave it to me, I'll sort it out for you." It makes my heart dance. Even more so when the person being delegated to loves the prospect of helping out by doing work they love. There is a hugely pleasant feeling that accompanies successful delegation, but it is most definitely a habit and, for some people, it's a bit like developing the habit of exercise or going to the gym. It takes effort to break the barrier of not delegating and doing it for oneself. Overcome that barrier, and the upside worms its way into the psyche, which makes it addictive because the benefits are so evident. I focus a lot on time being the biggest benefit of delegation, with the proviso that what you do with it is the ergo benefits. However, as delegation always works laterally, it is possible to collaborate and redistribute work according to who is good at, or loves, doing certain things. So it can also mean that you get to do more of what you're great at and presumably love doing most. In addition, it means that you're surrounded by people who are doing the stuff that you're not good at, and we know that that is a winning strategy. Always get someone who is better than you to do stuff for you. It means a better job gets done. If ever there was a no-brainer, how much encouragement do you need? Either way, delegation means you get to fill more of your time with stuff you want to do, as opposed to being overwhelmed with things you don't like doing so much, which therefore take longer to do and longer to mentally move away from once done, and in doing so cost even more time. That's a mouthful, but it's true. This book is intended to get the message out there that sharing, or in other words delegating downwards, upwards, and sideways, is good for us individually, as a family, as a team, as a small business, as a department, as a big business, and thus as an economy. I don't think we do it enough. I don't think we're taught how to do it, or that it is a good thing to do. And I'm hoping this book, the accompanying online program, and the available workshops help to change that. Good luck. Delegate and grow. Part 1. Introducing Delegation. 1. The definition of delegation. Most people walk around with knowledge of many words and probably wouldn't feel a need to look them up in a dictionary. I only looked up the verb delegate myself for the sake of clarity at the beginning of a workshop I was about to deliver. I almost didn't recognize the word from its definition. In fact, I realized the word's meaning had changed, and that it was time to revisit the notion of delegation with a fresh pair of eyes. To revisit this often ignored, though always expected, skill of a manager. The strict definition as written in the Oxford English Dictionary is, to delegate, verb, the act of transferring or handing over work to another person usually more junior than oneself. This was probably highly appropriate and factually correct during the 50s, 60s, and maybe even 70s, when a secretary was often the equivalent of an office wife. The boss was more often called by title and surname, and subordinates by their first or surname only. Management status was cherished, and the notion of rank still fresh from the post-war era. The 80s perpetuated the notion of delegation as a one-way process. the sometimes aggressive dumping of often less attractive tasks to a junior. The characteristic excess and status-led attitude of the yuppie years gave way to a much more sensitive and somewhat politically correct era, which led to a far greater consideration of managerial relationships and the dynamics of emotional intelligence being applied in the workplace. In addition, during this time, essentially from the 90s onwards, we have seen an explosion in technological advancement. Though the 80s was the beginning of the mobile phone era, the 90s saw the rise of email and electronic communication, and thereafter and through the noughties, we have seen the rise of social networking sites and more latterly the, largely worldwide, addition of smartphones. Smartphones have, to a great extent, imprisoned us in a world of infomania, whereby the phone has become a constant companion, less a phone for many and more a device that makes unqualified demands on our time. As a consequence, it is a huge distraction, often dragging highly paid and highly qualified professionals and business people into a time-wasting mire of deletion and, often overzealous, ill-considered, speedy responses. Of course, emails, social media, and the internet are hugely valuable too, but their impact on delegation, in the strict sense of the word, has been dramatic. Think back to the archetypal image of a secretary who, for the sake of stereotypical accuracy, we will say was female. Her role was to take down dictation, type up letters and memos, remember them. Often she would draft replies to letters and memos herself, in her boss's style for him to edit and or sign. For him, his communication schedule was controlled and limited. The post came in and was prioritized for his attention by his secretary. Communiques requiring urgent attention were pushed under his nose, with or without suggested replies. He studied them, decided how to act, dictated or directed a responsive action to his secretary, reply, meeting, delegation to another or ignore, and got on with other things until she had something to report. Note, then, that he was not constantly checking for replies, or in fact able to directly communicate quickly, or instigate prolonged, often instant, discussion on a matter. Clearly, this scenario rarely exists today, but its historic place in our, actually quite recent view, of delegation remains true. Fast forward even to the 90s, and I would argue that secretaries were far more likely to be in charge of the email inbox, responding on behalf of their managers, deleting, prioritizing, replying, and taking action where appropriate, precisely as a result of the legacy of a life and role prior to the emergence of electronic communication. My point here is not to make or even attempt to make a social study on the impact that the digital age has had on our lives and economy. Far from it. Merely, I seek to illustrate that roles have changed in recent times as a result of these advances, and with it, our certainty and our relationship with skills such as delegation. If I may stray briefly from the management skill that is delegation, let us expand the notion that the social digital age has blurred the lines for many of us and that adaptation is vital to maintain quality leadership in our businesses and successful businesses as a result. Our lives are now indelibly published online. See the enlightening short talk by Juan Enriquez. They can be researched by employers assessing potential and in-post employees and vice versa. Managers can no longer maintain a professional distance from their colleagues, team, and managers, unless they entirely shun the social media world and, even then, they have limited control over what others may post about them, pictures and all. This changes the game. Managerial leadership now has to be managed in the context of an extended professional landscape. Everyone can have a deeper knowledge of anyone else's personal or past professional life, all at the push of a button. Suddenly, we are all famous. If, once again, we take the strict definition of the word, then, without qualification of the elements, known, and many, we all have the potential to fall into the category of famous. And so we have to add reputation management more vigorously to our skill portfolio. These days, many of us grapple, at all ages, to understand what this alone means to our online persona, how we appear to everyone in our world, friends, family, our children and their grandchildren, their teachers and lecturers, our employers, colleagues, suppliers, and clients is increasingly something to think about. And we have a very clear and present need to address what this means for each of us. As an entrepreneurial middle-aged female with preteen children, I have both a business and personal need to understand these technological impacts. But I am not a techie. I find it more a necessary evil than a welcome invasion. That said, I embrace the benefits into my life without thinking about them. Instant messaging, online diary and document access, indulgent voyeurism, music and movies on the move, and so on. My chances of being papped in a compromising Friday night position by a friend, who then plasters the pics all over the latest social media platform, are mercifully limited, though not entirely over. However, management of these risks for our children are highly prevalent and relevant. The benefits and damage, even to the point of suicide, are extreme and real, and in large part we all understand the need to learn to deal with it. More importantly, though, with regards to this book, we need to understand what, sometimes subtle, impacts this new, modern, technology-driven world has on delegation. How we delegate, how often, what form it takes, and how effective it is. These impacts are not just the preserve of technology, though its existence influences the other key factors of gender and, slowly, increasing equality between the sexes and the influence of culture on this. If we look again at the post-war period, we will see the stereotype of a white-collar male worker making his way up the corporate ladder, and the point when he would be awarded the office wife. This would be a benefit both for him and for his real-life wife, as the new employee would be able to do more personal tasks for their boss, such as picking up the dry cleaning, making hair and dental appointments, that normally fell to the boss's housewife. This was the social, status, and professional reward for achieving a certain level of management. These days, where the equivalent of the office wife exists in a less frequent or more likely to be shared scenario, and with the advent of greater equality, greater expectations of women's performance and career ambitions in the workplace, the delegation relationship is often, but not yet always, very different. Culturally, we live in a more equal society where the media has helped to shape our views of those in positions of so-called power. Celebrities, royals, and politicians are regularly featured and exposed in publications and online. In fact, as social media enables us to instantly enter almost anyone's life, a degree of deference has almost certainly been lost at all levels of society. And so delegation, in part, becomes a choice not just for the superior, to draw on the Oxford English Dictionary definition and to return us to the original point, but also for the junior. It is less an expected part of one's lot and more an acceptable part of one's role. That it is acceptable also means it can be deemed unacceptable, and this, to my mind, defines the art of delegation, or, more precisely, the verb to delegate, as a skill that involves reducing one's own workload by handing it over to another party or software application who, agrees to execute an agreed list of actions to an agreed standard within an agreed time. Later, we will apply this thinking to delegation in scenarios other than the workplace and examine the multi-directional and multimedia capability of delegation in the home and in a political landscape, as well as looking more deeply at the upwards and sideways manifestations of delegation. The gift of time is accompanied by an online program that offers practical help, activities, and accountability for action. 2. The benefits of delegation. There are multiple benefactors of successful, or even simply effective delegation when it is an integral part of a company's operational culture. We will address the financial benefits which apply to business owners, or those responsible and directly able to influence company growth, later. But in the meantime, what about everyone and everything else? Where are the benefits for them, and what do they look like, and how, most importantly, can this be measured? As well as what I term soft benefits, which relate to how people feel in their work and in their life. There are also hard benefits, which can directly transcribe into financial improvement. It's a somewhat sad fact of life that money talks. In terms of adopting a new way of working, that is, delegating more and the encouragement to do so in a corporate environment, there has to be a clear benefit to the organization, something more than hope value. The prospect of generating an increase of cold hard cash is always a good motivator, and therein lies the importance of the value of delegation in financial terms. Whatever the varied benefits of delegation, there is one common denominator which results from effective delegation: time. By virtue of handing over workload or tasks, the delegator first gets his or her time back. This is the benefit of delegation. In truth, it is the only benefit of delegation to the delegator. What then transpires may or may not be a beneficial use of that time, but time in itself provides the benefit of choice. Clearly, if one operates as a business owner or at the top of an organization and with limited supervision, the choice of what to do with time freed up is arguably greater. If the why, which motivates the delegation in the first place, is clear, agreed, and achievable, then the benefits become more recognizable and tangible as they manifest. If the why is not clear, and we will tackle this in greater depth as part of the process of delegation, then time can easily be wasted, and we are all capable of that. If delegation in its strictest sense is passing on work to someone else, and if the immediate and most obvious result of that is an unfilled gap in time, one can see where that leads. If we backpedal a little, we can start at home with the young. The purpose of a parent is to make themselves redundant. There is more on this, with commentary from Elizabeth O'Shea, a renowned parenting coach, in Chapter 14. In achieving their own redundancy, parents, and clearly within this term I include any form of carer, produce young adults, capable, independent, and equipped, insofar as they can be, to take on the world of adulthood. The result, of course, will be happier, more independent children, who know that part of their role is to pass on this knowledge to future generations. And if we start to achieve redundancy at work, we will create a rolling production line of passing back the workload, tasks, and required outcomes, freeing up time for us to develop, grow, and find new ways of achieving more, and being more fulfilled. There are many routes and stakeholders, and there are many motivating reasons for making oneself redundant. Retirement, for example, is most successfully achieved for both the individual and the organization if a successor who picks up the workload and carries forth the legacy of the retiree is put into place. The retiree is free to retire because he or she is effectively redundant, by design, of course. Similarly, an employee leaving a role or an organization is a fact of life and a fact of a successful career. Just as in the case of our retiree, leaving a role is much more successfully achieved if the role leaver has been able to achieve their own redundancy through the appointment and training of a successor. Great delegation creates jobs at the back end of the production line and development, improvement and breakthroughs at the front line. One can't possibly do all that one already does and then add in more in order to improve or progress. The ability to delegate with the intention of making the initial job description as redundant as possible creates employment, directly and virtually, means flexible working and new self-employment opportunities for otherwise unemployable people, enables employees at all levels to delegate those areas of their workload that are least favorable, that they are less good at, or that they can pass on to a potential successor so that they can add new skills, take on or develop new activities, or explore new ways to improve their self, job, team, or organization. That is, have a better or more enjoyable job, and so be a better and more pleasant coworker. Enables managers and executives to explore the limits of their potential because they are not bogged down by repetitive tasks through downward delegation. Enables employees at all levels to develop their skill sets and experience, and to earn accolades and show their potential to their superiors through successful upward delegation as well as successful receipt of downward delegated workload. enables a happier workforce comprising workers who play to their strengths through sideways delegation and get to enjoy jobs that consist largely of things they enjoy doing most and are best at. Economic impacts spread far. In creating employment, we create increased disposable income and an increase in consumerism, as well as all the related impacts on the housing and property market. In freeing up SME owners to create growth, we already know of the hundreds of billions of pounds this adds to the global economy. In freeing up managers and executives to be creative and generate growth, we naturally return increased taxes to the government and improve shareholder return, which also presumably results in bonuses for staff and all the requisite benefits mentioned regarding disposable income. In applying all the same delegation disciplines and in achieving the same results in civic service, government, and government divisions, we achieve improvements in service delivery and through reduction in costs underlying a return or benefit to the taxpayer. In applying all the same to charities, an increased proportion of funds raised can be attributed, one hopes, to the causes supported by the charity. 3. The value of delegation. There are many soft benefits to delegation, which are highlighted in the previous chapter, but there is a definitive commercial value to the bottom line of a business or organization that gets delegation right. It manifests itself essentially in 4 ways. The newly created revenue for SMEs, corporate, charities, and governments. The value added to the business for SMEs as a reduction of dependence on the owner, both for resale and for business resilience. The value added to the business as a result of removal of the owner from the day-to-day operation of the business. The savings made on staff salaries and benefits as a result of reduction of tasks carried out by overqualified staff. Newly created revenue as a result of delegation. It was only this first that I set out to measure when I started my studies and research into the art of delegation. The basic premise was a simple one. If, in this first instance, a business owner could free up 10% of their time, what would they do with that time? Of the first 200 respondents, over 90% of them had grown their business in their results. Asked how much by, the average level was over 20%. So a workload reduction of 10% would result in a business growth of 20%. It was simple then to pick up government statistics on SMEs and their turnover and extrapolate what a 20% uplift across the board would mean to the economy. The result can be measured in billions, 271 billion pounds per annum to be precise. This figure, of course, represents potential only. Business owners may not achieve their 20% growth. They may struggle to free up 10% of their time and keep it that way, or they may do something else with the time, like semi-retire, or just keep the business ticking over. But what is clear is that for a focused owner who delegates sensibly and well, the value is manifold. And for the economy as a whole, a growth in business of 20% has manifest benefits. There will be more individuals with disposable income and more individuals being taxed, benefiting both the high street and the nation as a whole. But the 10% workload has to go somewhere, and here is a further benefit. Delegation results in increased employment and/or an inherent uplift in the requirement for a virtual or flexible workforce, that is, the virtual assistant, or VA, market, which allows individuals to offer their time for money and thus gives an entry back into the workplace where before there was none. For a one-person business with a turnover of, say, £60,000 per annum, who frees up 10% of their time and creates growth of 20% as a result, their income is increased by £1,000 per month. To a small business with £400,000 turnover, £80,000 and a larger business with a turnover of £2.5 million, the potential uplift as a result of delegation, more than £500,000. In corporates with a mission to grow, the potential for growth is amazing. This is something that wasn't entirely expected when I started my research. One of my early clients had a very clear objective: to free up partner time, all 150 of them.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?